The Medium is a psychological horror game with a considerable amount of the game focused on the story. The game is full of story, and it's only right to make a video talking about that story. And this video will not only cover that, but also the ending of the game and what it means, as well as the loads of additional items we find from postcards to notes explaining characters like Francis, the Maw, Richard, and many others. As always, spoiler warning ahead as the whole game will be spoiled, especially the ending, as we discussed that very early in the game to make sense of the whole timeline, so beat it and come back. With that out of the way, welcome to the Medium Story Explained. So this game's story is all over the place, in the sense that the story is there, but it's not really discovered in a linear way. We're just picking up the pieces as we go along and are basically forced to put them together, which is not a bad thing, it just may confuse some people. So let's start as slow as we possibly can and explain Marianne and what she is, that being a medium. Mediums are people with special powers. They're able to peer into the spirit realm while also existing in the regular realm, or as the game calls it, the material realm, which I'll be referring it to as that for the rest of the video. As Marianne says herself, she's able to interact and see into both worlds at the same time, and she can be affected in both realms. We can see this in game as she can be attacked by the boss that only exists in the spirit realm yet take damage and die in the material one. As a medium, Marianne helps the souls and spirits of the world pass on so they're not stuck here. She can also use her powers like Spirit Blast and Insight to aid in this. It's not confirmed if that's actually her true purpose as a medium, but it's what she does with her powers regardless. Very early in the intro we find out that Marianne is an orphan, well at least she was made to believe that. We see Marianne in possibly her mid-20s throughout the game, but there is a lot of stuff that happens before we even start the game that we uncover as we play. Marianne at the beginning of the game works at the funeral home with her foster parent Jack. Sadly, he passed away a couple days ago, so we have to take care of the usual funeral home procedures of dressing up the dead and making sure they look presentable in the casket. After some time, she gets a call from a man only known as Thomas, saying a familiar line to her which piques her interest enough to go to the location he specified, which is Niwa Resort. This is then where the real story of the game begins. So now that the intro and the basics are covered, let's go over everything before this point. Towards the end of the game, we investigate the Red House, where tons of her backstory is shown. Marianne's family consists of Lillian and Thomas. Their mother existed, but she passed away. According to Marianne, both her parents died in a car crash and she was the only survivor, but Marianne was lied to as she wasn't the only survivor, only her mom died. Lily for some time blamed Marianne for the death of her mom. We can see this in Thomas's note titled Demons. In the game we fight two large creatures, the Child Eater and the Hound. These are the physical manifestations of the person in the spirit realm. Both the Hound and the Child talk like they are the person that we uncover. The Hound is within Henry's memories, and the Hound, when we meet him in the spirit realm, talks like he is Henry, mentioning how the damage was already done and that he was already dead, that Thomas made sure of that, referencing the fight the two had prior. It could also be argued that the creatures are their negative actions, thoughts, and emotions all stored up in one place and once again physically manifested into some creature. The Maw is Lily's manifestation, which is why they all exist in the spirit realm, except for the Maw where he can occasionally transcend the dimensional barrier. This is most likely due to Lily setting the Maw free, which we will discuss soon. Thomas is Marianne's father, and he was the one who gave us the call in the intro of the game, and the one we play throughout the game as well. Thomas also has the same power as Marianne, as we discovered that he passed down this power to both the sisters when they were born. With the quick intros of both Thomas and Lily out of the way, let's delve more into them and what exactly is going on. With Lily, her story starts at the beginning with Sadness. Sadness, Lily, and Lillian are all the same person. Just remember that as we continue this video. Sadness is only in the spirit realm, as we see this numerous times, and she instructs us to find a man named Richard, even though we want Thomas. But Richard's memories and the items we find on the way help us to piece together Sadness's, well, sadness. From the various insights, we see two other characters, Hannah and Bernard. We know these are relevant to Sadness because we see the butterflies instructing us where to go, which is Sadness showing us the situations involving her. These insights play like a broken up story. Lily, Hannah, and Bernard are playing hide and seek. Lily's trying to find them and Hannah is hiding with Bernard, but she has a plan to get back at her. We can see Lily talking to herself and Hannah calling her a weirdo for it. This is because she's talking with her spirit form. We see the same thing with Thomas in the first memory until we realize that he isn't just talking to himself, he's talking to his spirit form, and since no one one else can see the spirit form, it looks like he's rambling to himself. This is the exact same situation for Lily. Even in the note A Quiet Girl, which is written by Ursula, the nurse of Richard, we see that she was asked to watch over Lily, and that she seems like a nice girl and likes to talk to her imaginary friends, and it almost sounds like two people are talking, and there's a picture of most likely an artist's representation of this engagement of Lily having another side to her, that spirit form. Lily, during her hide-and-seek game, enters a dark room and can't see anyone, is starting to become a little frightened. Hannah is still enacting her plan, but Bernard is still against the plan. He feels bad for her. We then see the trail lead us to a locker with some drawings and a cat figurine. This, like many things in this game, are confirmed to us, but we can see that it was heavily implied that Hannah jumped Lily and locked her in the locker. We then meet Sadness again, and she talks about Richard. She seems clearly distressed about him as she runs away out of fear after she thought about Richard again. Richard is a painter and the teacher of the art class at Niwa. Lily ended up joining the class, but wanted to play with her other friends instead, possibly referring to her spirit form, but Thomas made it clear to Richard that she doesn't do that. Lily is too young to understand the spirit realm and what it can really do, so it's best not to bring it up to her, and even if we did bring it up to her, she wouldn't understand anyway. We can see that Lily is also a gifted musician too, and Richard talks about him reminiscing of the good times in his life when he hears this melody of hers, a foreshadow to a future memory dive of Richard, which is quite interesting and well placed. We can then see a memory of Richard painting Lily, and then she reminds him of a girl he liked. It's not named, but it's most likely Rose, the girl he met when he was young. Richard, in another memory, is crying and feeling sad over doing something. This is linked to the sketchbook Thomas finds in Richard's room. It's unclear what's inside as we never see for ourselves, but my theory is that Richard either did something sexual with her, like drawing her in a sexual way, or maybe he hit her, or maybe it's even a combination of both, as that sketchbook seems to be very relevant as to why Thomas is angry. Richard also brings up how he wanted to die and that he didn't do it, possibly meaning that he was controlled to do it, so maybe it wasn't his fault technically, but rather something inside him. Like I said, it's just a theory, so it's not entirely concrete, so I encourage you to comment what you think happened. Regardless, it's clear that Richard did something that hurt her, whether it was physical or emotional. We find out from Spirit Thomas at the end of the game that when Richard had hurt her, that caused the maw to awaken. In Thomas's note called A Different Kind of Sickness, we see him document that Lily isn't physically ill, but that something on that day stirred something in her. We meet Sadness again on the swing set and come to the Red House, where we hear about the burning of the Red House. We see from Thomas's second memory, the Red House where Lily lives was burned down, thanks to a man named Henry who is investigating Thomas. Lily would have died if not for the maw. The maw has been in her head since the incident with Richard, but he kept growing stronger and stronger. At this point, he enacted a deal. If she lets him out, she'll be kept alive. Marianne was also present at the house, and she barely survived too. When the house is on fire, Thomas hears a voice, and he calls out to both the sisters, meaning Marianne was present at the house at the time, and Lily even asks about her sister if she'll be okay, but the maw says, "Don't worry about her, remember when she killed your mom." Marianne, after the burning of the house, was hospitalized and put in a coma. This is why she doesn't remember anything about her childhood, and why she doesn't remember Lily or Thomas right away, despite them being her family. Lily's story ends here for right now, as Thomas is now involved too. Thomas, as we said, is the father of both Marianne and Lily. Thomas also has a ton of notes labeled under Troubled Man's Notes in the memos. Thomas was doing something and tried to keep it hidden. From the various notes which talk about the less obvious places at Niwa in the underground Nazi bunker he found behind the woods, he was using the resort as a front to focus on his work, which would end up catching the eye of an investigator. Thomas was the manager of the Niwa Resort and even offered to extend a helping hand to Richard. Thomas knew Richard when Thomas was a little boy, but when he was older at the resort, lots of time Thomas would explain his dream world, as he called it. Richard would then paint what he envisioned. We can assume that it was just Thomas talking about the spirit realm, which is why Richard talked about his descriptions of the place being so thorough, almost as if he was there, which he actually was. It's hard to explain something like the spirit realm without being looked at as crazy, so Thomas used it as a therapy session almost, while Richard just painted. Richard was given a place to stay at the resort thanks to Thomas, which is how he ended up here. Since he was an entrusted friend, he was tasked with watching over Lily, which we previously discussed, and we know that at some point Richard would end up hurting her in some way. This caused him to lash out at Richard. I'll delve more into Richard and his backstory a bit more later, but once the burning of the Red House occurred, he went into the bunker and hid Lily away from the outside world. Thomas left Marianne at the hospital so that she could have a normal life away from the maw and Lily while he tried to figure out how to stop it. That's why in Thomas's room, a business card for Jack, the foster parent to Marianne, is in there. He contacted him so that she would have someone to raise her. The don't written on the card may be him forcing himself not to call Jack and ask about Marianne, as it would just ruin everything he did for her safety. As we know, during the burning of the house, the maw was let free, although during his research, Thomas wanted to figure out how to be left alone, or at least in his case, separate the spirit realm from him. In countless notes, he talks about just wanting to be alone and wants nothing to do with the spirit realm, that he just wants to be a father and nothing else. That's why Salt, salt is in his office in the beginning of the game, along with the burn marks on the broken glass. He was experimenting with different ingredients to see what worked, and then he finally discovered that it was salt. This is why Lily's room is covered in salt in the bunker, and there's an IV bag of salt in her room. He wanted to separate the maw from her, so he lined her room with salt and injected salt into her because the maw was becoming too powerful now that he was free. Referencing his other notes, Thomas noticed that the maw became even stronger, saying that he was hearing it in his dreams and even in his mind. Thomas even thought about the last case scenario of killing Lily, but as a father he simply couldn't do that. Thomas, after the massacre and the abandoning of the resort, would still use the place as his office for his test experiments, as we see a recently written to-do list as well as the energy of his presence from the phone, meaning he called us in the intro from this phone. In the back room is a hidden away area. He was developing photos here, possibly to help with research, but he also took a picture of Marianne, which we see in the slideshow. There's even a note about this called keeping distance. Thomas didn't want to leave her at the hospital, but he also didn't want his daughter to be involved in this mess, but he knew it was only a matter of time until she figured it out. Thomas was going to let Marianne live her life thinking she was the only one with these mysterious powers, but Thomas used his last resort of calling Marianne at the intro as it got too strong for him to handle and knew that she could deal with it on her own. There's also him being a father, which is understandable why he has a picture of her. He hasn't seen her for years and he wanted at least something of hers to look at, as he clearly misses her. That recently written to-do list in his office shows that he is still trying to help Lily, fully separate from the maw so he can kill it. Yes, the maw has broken free, but he has broken free of her restraints on him, but he's still connected to her because it's her negative feelings manifested all in one place. Like we said before, that's why if he can break this link with the maw, he will truly die, which makes sense why he comes back after killing it so many times we see throughout the game. I want to take this moment to talk about Richard, Francis, and Henry so that we can truly understand everybody else's stories, as they're what ties everything together. I thought it would be appropriate now and not before, as it would have just been too much information all at one time. We see a couple memories of Richard before and after his meeting with Thomas. In the beginning, he was talking with a nurse named Ursula. He was being sweet with her, giving her flowers and such. Richard would ultimately send her a letter explaining that they are nothing more than friends, as he is a damaged man. Richard most likely thinks that anyone he loves betrays him or dies, and he doesn't want that with Ursula. The previous line will make sense in a moment, but we can see that Ursula was not happy about this, as she has an empty pill bottle on a sink and a drawing nearby made by sadness of her crying. When we confront Richard as Thomas, we go into his mind and see his past. All of Richard's memories were of his childhood. Richard is old when we see him in the memories, so that means as a kid he was somewhere around the 1940s. This is solidified by the upcoming memories we see. Richard's father left at a young age to go fight in the Polish army. In the office space, we get a broken up passage of Genesis 3:19. This passage is the conclusion to Adam's sins by God, saying that you were born from dust and that you will return to dust, and that he will not work with purpose or meaning, only stress and frustration. We find the last note from the Minister of Military Affairs saying that Richard's father died. This is most likely the fight between Germany and Poland during World War II, in which Poland lost. We then get shoved into another memory of a maze. Richard is a child talking to a girl named Rose. Rose gives him something that is supposed to be kept safe. Richard's mom was lonely due to the loss of her husband, so she ended up finding another lover. This father, however, was not as cheerful. It's implied that he was physically abusive to Richard as a kid. As we walk down the hallway, Richard attempts to save his mother from his stepfather, and it's possible that she was being abused too, but it doesn't seem to have worked, as we don't hear Richard again after his initial lines until we walk in and hear her scream more while Richard berates himself, saying that he couldn't even protect himself or his mom. He meets with Rose one more time and is clearly displaying anger towards her because of his stepfather's actions, and he's taking it out on her. Later we hear his stepfather yell in pain, an interesting twist from what we previously heard. As we explore the attic, we hear his stepfather repeat some words, link this with the noose at the end, and it seems like he was hung, which is nice, but it comes as bittersweet. As when Richard goes to the maze, Rose is not there, but the item she gave Richard to keep safe is fully revealed to be a Star of David. Rose was Jewish. For a quick recap history lesson, one of the biggest tragedies of the world was the Holocaust, where Germany exterminated millions of Jews. Not everyone in Germany or the Germany-conquered countries like Poland agreed with this viewpoint, so some took to hiding Jewish people in their homes. The Nazi Party discovered this was happening and sent people to investigate the houses, and said that any Jews or people who helped Jews would be put to death, and this is what happened to Richard's stepfather. It's unclear how all this happened though, as it seems implied that Rose did not live with Richard, as if they would have lived together they would have just met in the house and not some random maze far away. It seems that the mother twisted the words so that she could get the stepfather in trouble without incriminating herself, since she was in a relationship with him. So now Richard is all alone in the world. He doesn't have a father anymore, he has no best friend, and he still has a mother, but she also indirectly killed his only friend. This trauma could explain why he hurt Lily. Rose and Lily do have similar names related to flowers, and Richard mentions that she reminds her of someone he knew as a kid, and maybe those awful memories flooded back into his mind and he hurt Lily. Next to the area back as Marianne, we see a police chief questioning Thomas. Thomas made it seem like he was upset that his friend was possibly dead, but Marianne notices that he's lying. Thomas almost killed Richard with his special powers, but he was now in a vegetative state. Thomas would assign Ursula as his nurse so she got to see him and take care of him, as we see in one memory, but due to the mob breaking free and slaughtering the hotel, the mob would make Ursula the vessel, being a voice in her head and constantly reminding her of her bad thoughts. Ursula was also prescribed pills for her hysteria and insomnia, so she most likely didn't take those, which caused her to go insane. This ends with Ursula talking to Richard and stabbing him repeatedly. Even though he can't speak, he's still alive and can feel every time she stabs him. This is the start of the massacre. Francis was the groundskeeper of the resort. He made tons of postcards we can find that he was going to send to his family, but he never had the courage to for some reason. They sounded like fairly normal, talking about his life at the resort until they start to take a turn. The postcards titled A Scenic View and Won't Stop prove this, one talking about the residents, how they're nice and dead, and at the end of the other where he says he just wishes it was quiet and why it won't stop talking. The key word is it. It spirals further into madness when we meet Francis in person, and he talks about him being at fault for killing everyone, that they are dead because of him, and the postcard next to him talks about him letting her see the light. This is backed up by the cards near the area which talk about the voices he hears and that he wants Lily to see the outside world. It's possible it was the maw influencing him. Francis inside his tent, however, is dead and we can't talk to him anymore. From what we can gather, the red house burned in the back of the resort, but the resort was still operational. It wasn't until Francis noticed Lily in the bunker and let her out that the maw regained his freedom, and thanks to there not being salt anywhere outside the bunker, the massacre happened. This caused the resort to shut down. Francis was somehow alive and then died soon after. He looks long dead before we hear his last words. It couldn't have been at that very moment he said those, considering there's a bag over his head and that the life looks sucked out of him like the deers nearby. He was probably dead for quite a bit of time, but not as long as the residents in the resort. He most likely stayed to think about what he had done, or due to the mob being in his head, making him go crazy. Henry is our last side character, and he shows up quite early as he's the unidentified man on the phones we hear. The beginning phone calls we see don't explain too much, just updates to his superior saying he's working on it and that new details have emerged, but never explain what those details are. We get a lot more info when we make it to Thomas's garage. He seems to be questioning Francis, Richard, and Lily about Thomas's whereabouts, saying that he needed him for something. On a recorder, Henry talks about the Gemini case and that he's proceeding with the investigation into Thomas, but he may have suspected him. Thomas is trying to break into Henry's suitcase and find some classified files, and that he's part of the security service. Henry knows a lot of Thomas already, like his birthplace of Warsaw and how the Nazis would have killed him, but they harnessed his power, as he calls it. But because Germany lost in World War II in the cause of the Cold War time period, Russia was in control of Poland for some time and arrested Thomas to figure out why he was so special. After they ran tons of experiments on him, he would eventually escape at the age of 18 after killing some scientists and was free from their rule over him until he used his powers again on Richard. Henry was sent to investigate Thomas's powers. This would explain why Thomas was hiding or mentioning the less obvious places of the resort and the bunker. He was hiding from the people he escaped from. He knocks him out and attempts to get him to talk by burning down the red house. This is further shown in memories after this when we play as Marianne again and hear Henry dumping gasoline everywhere. When he awakes, he sees the house on fire and he uses his powers on Henry. As Spirit Thomas, we can go through his mind and uncover more details into the Gemini case. We see in a film reel inside that Henry was investigating Jacob Wilk for a recent meat scandal and that he was charged for corruption and the theft of high quality meat, which he replaced with lesser quality ones at the same price. But Henry and him share the same last name. This is Henry's father. It seems he ratted out his own father for his mistreatment and abuse when he was a butcher, and Henry was forced to work with him at the shop. Because of these past actions, he sold him out. He wasn't the only one to be caught, however, others involved were also apprehended, and according to the newspaper, will most likely be hanged for it. And the next reel is from his superior about a job which seems to be top priority and very classified. This is the start of the investigation, or the Gemini case. Henry is to consult with Richard, which we know he does from the insights we saw earlier, and investigate a person of interest at the Niwa Resort, we know as Thomas. The note strongly recommends that he acquaints himself with the Soviet doctor's notes that were recorded in 1950, which most likely relates to Thomas and his powers. It's not confirmed that it was Thomas, but considering he was held by the Soviet Union around this time and he has these superpowers that are really rare, it was most likely him. Some of it is classified, but it's clear they're coming up with some interesting theories. In session 42, they're gaining more info on Thomas and how he's able to talk to his spirit form, and that this may have been a result of a near-death experience. Thomas seemed to put someone in a vegetative state in session 43, which would make sense sense why they seeked out Richard, as the same thing happened to him. Session 44 talks about how they up security in the dosages to keep him secure, as he's very dangerous. That clearly didn't work, as we know that he breaks out. Later we get a bit more info on Henry once again, as it plays audio of him leaving suddenly. His wife seems unfazed by the news, and his son is upset that he's leaving, as he doesn't like it when he leaves. When Spirit Thomas makes it to Kid Henry, he's caught by the monster called the Hound, which we've been seeing quite a bit in our time in his mind, and he becomes trapped. The Hound mentions that there is no unhappy child or guilty conscience like he thought he would be finding here, just the Hound. After this memory sequence, Thomas and Henry get into a fight, and Thomas ends up winning. After the memory, Marianne wakes up and sees the Hound. Thankfully, she beats him, and he is gone. The part with the Hound is interesting, however. Spirit Thomas at the end of the game said he was trapped in there with the Hound until we eliminated him. This is around the time of the burning house, so the bunker, massacre, and the salt pouring hasn't happened yet. This may partially relate to what Spirit Thomas was saying to Marianne about not feeling regular Thomas's presence anymore, but that could also relate to the after credits ending too. Regardless, Thomas in the material world was free from Spirit Thomas thanks to the salt, and Spirit Thomas was trapped in the Hound's cage for years until we came along and freed him. So that was quite a bit of info we talked about. Before we bring up the ending, let's quickly recap what we know so far. It won't be as detailed as the previous parts of this video, it'll be very simple, but it's just enough to walk away from the video at least saying that you understand the story at its most basic level. Thomas as a kid was born with special powers. When he was a kid, he was experimented on, but later would break free of the Soviet doctors who kept him locked away. He ended up staying in the Niwa Resort and used it as a front so he could hide from his captors and continue researching the spirit realm on his own. He would later have two daughters, Lily and Marianne, with his wife, who would die very early into their lives. Thanks to Thomas's power, he passed them down to his daughters. Thomas needed help watching over his daughters and their power, so he hired his old friend Richard to help, until Richard hurt Lily, and using his powers he put him in a vegetative state. Because of this, a little while later, the investigator known as Henry would find him and interrogate him about his powers. To get him to speak, he burnt down the house. In the house was Marianne and Lily. Lily was saved by the Maw, a spiritual being that had been hibernating in her since her interaction with Richard. He isn't a friendly being, however, as he wanted to get out and taste death. So they formed a deal to let the Maw break free and she gets to live. She agreed with the Maw. Marianne also lived the fire too. She would then be sent to a hospital and be put in a coma. After talking with his daughter, Thomas discovered the voice in her head is now free and could cause him danger. This, coupled with the government knowing of Thomas's location, hid in a bunker away from the outside world. He also cut all contact from his daughter Marianne so that she can have a normal life away from everything that has happened and hopes she won't seek him out. He discovered that salt was the key ingredient in making the spirit realm go away, which he originally used to keep that side of him away so he could feel normal again, but eventually when Lily became unstable from what Richard did, he used the salt on her too. This is further proved by the salt on the walls and the IV bag with salt in it. This kept the Maw secure for some time until the groundskeeper Francis let her out. Francis felt bad that she was there all the time and wanted her to see the outside world for a little bit, but this would be problematic as this caused the Maw to break free once more, causing the infamous Niwa massacre. Francis blames himself for the whole incident and is ashamed of it. He would eventually succumb to the Maw's power and die like the others. We as Marianne are called by Thomas, who called this as a last resort to help, and after going through the whole resort, we meet with Spirit Thomas in the bunker, who mentions that Lily is still alive and that she can be helped. For the ending, we meet with Lily on the pier, and the two sisters reunite and talk as they haven't since they were kids. Lily explains the massacre and that she caused it. The Maw was created by her. Lily explains that all her father's attempts to rid the Maw of her failed, and that the dream Marianne was having, which is Thomas killing Lily on the pier, was something she wanted to happen. She wants to die, as that's the only way this ends. We meet with the Maw once more. The Maw gives away his plan, however. He doesn't need Lily anymore. He only wants Marianne now. Marianne then has the great idea to kill herself. If Lily dies, the Maw may disappear, but who knows if it won't come back and take Marianne over the same way it did Lily. But if Marianne was gone, the Maw would have no one else to use and can't enact any more bloodshed. A gunshot is heard and it's unclear who dies. Our after credits cutscene comes in with a mysterious person picking up a watch in the spirit realm. This is Thomas. Not only can we say this from his identifiable black gloves, but it's the same watch from the first memory. The reason we can't find Thomas in game is because he's been in the spirit realm. From his research, he must have found a way to get inside the realm. The reasoning is unclear, but it could be linked to him finishing off the Maw and ridding Lily of her curse. He was probably unsure if he would succeed in his mission to confront the Maw in the spirit realm, so just in case he called Marianne to help him as a backup. Or he could already be trapped, as in the intro he talks about it being dark and that the light is fading. It's a cool little cutscene that leaves everyone wanting more. This is either going to be left up to interpretation and stay this way, or a DLC. Considering the fact that only one of Bloober's games got DLC, which is Layers of Fear, it's unlikely this is resolved. There's always the possibility of a sequel that picks up from here, but who knows. For now, it's just going to be theory crafting and speculation. We now come to the end of the video. This is definitely one of the hardest videos I've ever done. The story was scattered everywhere, and putting it together was quite tough, but I think it did a solid job retelling it. For those interested, did you know that the Spirit Realm was heavily influenced by the Polish artist Beksinski? If you want to see his art talked more in depth, I highly recommend the video called The Nightmare Artist by In Praise of Shadows here on YouTube. I'll leave his link down below in the description. Tell him I sent you in to check out the game for himself. With that though, thank you for joining me on this journey through the story of the medium. Like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more lore content on other games in the future. Take care, and goodbye.